Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. Join Steve and his guests every week as he staggers from Georgia to Maine.
Welcome back to our little show, Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, sponsored by our friends at Trailtopia. This is kind of the second part of a double header on the show. Last week we had on the fabulous Dixie, or Jessica Mills. This week, on episode number 63, we have our almost equally fabulous partner, Carl Rohrig, otherwise known on the trail as the Mayor. For our conversation, every now and then you can hear what I presume is his little dog Katana in the background. I was half tempted to ask if I could talk to the dog as well. The Katana is yet another trail personality, though you'll hear all about Carl and his little buddy in a few minutes. We've also got another doc spot with Dr. Lynn Savino. I'm loving this section, with Lynn serving up well-researched information that has often left me speechless in my utter ignorance of the issues. This week she's talking about altitude sickness, not necessarily appropriate for the AT, but applicable on many other trails. While we're certainly not looking to extend these sections just for the sake of it, if you have any medical issues you'd like Lynn to advise us about, just drop me a line at steve@mightyblueontheat.com and I'll put it to Lynn. She's really trying to cover all the issues that may arise on the trail, so any new ideas will be very welcome indeed. Now, do you remember those cold, wet evenings on the trail when you pitched up at a shelter and there was nothing you would have rather had than a beautiful, hot, home-cooked meal? Well, apart from actually going home, you could try out one of the delicious meals from Trailtopia. Why not dig into their spectacular jambalaya with its authentic Creole flavour? Or how about their beef stew, which is loaded with beef, potatoes, carrots, mushrooms, corn, green beans and green bell pepper in a fantastic beef gravy? Go on, try them. Trust me, you're going to love them. Trailtopia, the best of home cooking away from home. I'm not kidding you, it's good stuff. Just before we get to Kyle, I wanted to mention that you need to stick around at the end. I'm reading Walking with Spring by Earl Schaefer, and we're concluding Chapter 2 today. So hang about for that. If you've just joined the show, you can go back a few episodes and listen from the beginning. If you like audio stories, then going back to the pilot episode of the show will introduce you to my journey on the trail. Mind you, beware, you're going to learn a whole lot more about me than you might wish to learn. Don't say that I didn't warn you. Now, let's have our chat with Carl Rohrig, or the Mayor. Okay, after Dixie last week, we've got the other half of hiking royalty, Carl Rohrig, or the Mayor. Hi, Carl, how are you?
How's it going, Steve? Thanks for having me.
Not too bad. And Carl is actually another of the class of 2014, but he's one of the ones I've interviewed I never actually met on the trail. I think you started just after me and finished just after me, but we'll come to that, to the hike in a minute. Were you well prepared for hiking the AT when you first got out there?
Absolutely not. I
Best way.
I didn't do enough research. Yeah, I didn't do enough research, and I asked all the wrong questions. And I went out there with about a 55 to 60 pound pack full of things that weren't really adequate.
So what were you taking out with you that was so much?
Gosh, I had the pack I was using. It was like a military style radio backpack. It was all zippers. I had more stuff strapped to the outside of it than I had that could actually fit inside of the pack. My sleeping bag was only 40 degrees, I believe, and it weighed almost 3 pounds. So then I had a sleeping bag liner, which was like another cheap sleeping bag that wasn't even a liner that weighed over another pound. And I think it gave me like maybe another 10 degrees of warmth. But yeah, I was completely over my head when I started that trail.
So what did you do? Did you adapt, make changes to the stuff you were carrying as you went on, or did you learn pretty quickly what was good and what wasn't good?
Well, I learned pretty quickly what was good and what wasn't good, but I didn't have the money to change any of it, so I just kind of had to suffer. I was able to get a few new things while I was out there, but I couldn't really replace too much stuff. I was stuck with my pack until the end. But I got like a sleeping pad. I didn't even have a sleeping pad when I went out there.
Oh my gosh!
I got a sleeping pad, and let's see what else. I got a stove. I had a little alcohol stove that I made that I took with me, and it was like watching grass grow, trying to get my water to boil. So, I got a little pocket rocket while I was out there.
Well, I presume since you've hiked quite a bit, since you've changed the setup of stuff you take with you, what's been the biggest change out in terms of kit? Have you really worked it out now? What to be taking?
Yeah, I've got all my stuff pretty much dialed in now. The biggest tweak was mostly to my big three items, my pack, my shelter, and my sleeping bag. I think when I did the AT, those three items alone, my pack didn't hold anything, yet it weighed 5 pounds. All my sleeping bags weighed close to 4 pounds altogether. And then, let's see, and then my shelter weighed, with the rain fly and the hammock itself, it was between 4 and 5 pounds. So that was
adds up, doesn't it, straight away? Yeah.
It was just, it was way over the top. Now I'm down to, like a sub 2 pound pack, sub 2 pound sleeping bag, and I just use a tarp now for my shelter. I've kind of abandoned the hammocks and stuff.
Oh, really? Wow, crikey.
Yeah.
Well, when I actually set out on the when I started writing my books, and someone said to me, "You need to do a free book," so I did a free book as well, which was based on a presentation I gave, which was hiking the Appalachian Trail is easy, especially if you've never hiked before. Because I think in those first, 100 miles, I learned so many wrong things that I was doing. But by learning them, but you know what? That's how anybody learns anything, isn't it? You learn, you make a mistake, and then you don't do it again. If you do it again, it'll just give you the same problem. So I think learning it on the way is a pretty good thing. And did you have an outdoors background then prior to going on the AT, as opposed to hiking? Any other outdoor activities?
I mean, my background was mostly in just like day hikes or just military type gear, stuff like that. So I thought I had a good grasp on, what I should take and what I needed. And when I really didn't, I didn't have, there's so many nuances. There's such a fine art to the long distance backpacking.
Yes.
When you look at it next to just like day hiking or car camping or even just military rucking and stuff like that. So, the slate had to be wiped clean, and I had to pretty much start from scratch with everything I knew.
Amazing. So tell us how you, and I know it happened to you quite early, how you came about being known as the Mayor, which is a great name, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
How'd you get that name?
Long story short, I got it for taking care of people. I always kind of took it upon myself to do the brunt of the work around camp or to help someone out, and it kind of became a bit of a slogan: the mayor provides, or the mayor takes care of his people. And it was my third day on the AT, and I was taking a 0 because I had rolled my ankle. And I was so bored. I was sitting there off the trail near Lance Creek, and I was so bored all day just sitting there resting. I just started building up, this big fire ring, and I built up these benches and stuff out of logs, just hobbling around. And when evening started to set in, I built up a nice fire. And being that, it was early on in the trail, there's tons of people starting every day.
Sure.
So I had close to 20 people that showed up to that camp area that evening, and everyone kind of gathered around and were just like, this is really nice. Who put this together? And I raised my hand, and they were like, oh, you're like the mayor of this spot. And so that, along with a couple other names, were kind of being bounced off me. But the mayor didn't stick until Baltimore Jack, officially gave it to me at Neal's Gap.
So you got the seal of approval from the Baltimore Jack. Well, you can't be better than that.
Yeah. So that was pretty cool. So I can't change it now. I can't.
Absolutely.
I know some people change their trail names after every through hike, but I think I'm stuck.
It's funny. I've noticed that Dixie refers to you every now and then as mayor as well. And sometimes she calls you Kyle. I'm not terribly sure whether one indicates something or the other one indicates something else. But she seemed to interchange when I was talking to her. She mentioned Kyle, then she mentioned the mayor, so I've just no idea.
Yeah.
And I know you've since hiked the PCT and quite a lot of the CDT. How do they shape up against the Appalachian Trail in your eyes?
They're all apples and oranges, to be honest. It's hard to compare them fairly. They're just so totally different. Just the hiking styles, the cultures, the amount of people. all of that stuff. The PCT, I would say, when looked at against the Appalachian Trail, physically, it's much easier. Logistically and mentally, I found it much harder with the lack of water.
Why mentally?
Mentally, mostly just bringing into the on the AT. They say the AT will turn you into a hiker, and the PCT will turn you into an athlete. And when you go out to do the PCT, you cannot hike it the same way that you hike the AT. You can go out on the AT and you can hike 5 miles, 10 miles, 15 miles. You can hike whatever amount of miles you want per day, and you'll still feel like you're doing something. Out on the PCT, you can't hike it the same way as you hike the AT. You got to try. At some point on the PCT, you have to start hiking 20 miles or better a day if you want to finish before the snow falls. And it doesn't matter if you're walking around the mall. 20 miles is 20 miles, and that wears on you day after day after day. When you're just like, God, I got to get 20 miles again, or you just can't dilly dally like you can on the AT. It's you got to keep moving a lot faster, and the heat and the altitude and the lack of water create more factors that kind of wear on your
I'm sure
wear on your spirit and your mental faculties, your mental endurance.
When you did the PCT, which it was last year, was it?
Yes.
Did you have as many fires as Dixie had to cope with this year or not?
No, not as many. I had a bunch of fires to contend with on the CDT this year, but on the PCT last year, I dealt with, I think maybe 2 or 3 active fires, and I only got detoured for one of them. But it was a really kind of important spot that I got detoured from. They shut down the last 20 to 30 miles into Kennedy Meadows going north. So you're talking the last miles of the desert, to get to the Sierra Nevada. And completing the desert is a huge milestone on the PCT. I would think. So that fire sprung up 3 miles in front of me. If I'd have been 3 or 4 miles ahead of where I was at when it sprung up, I could have been able to walk into Kennedy Meadows. But as a result, I had to go back and then find a way around it, and ended up having to.
I actually want to ask you the same question I asked Dixie, which was, when you're old and grey and you think back on your life, which one would bring a smile to your face the AT or the PCT?
The AT, for sure. That was.
Is it because it was the first one, or?
It's the first one. It jaded me. That is what. That is my. That is what a through hike is to me. That was my first through hike. Everything was so new, and just ingrained into me so deeply. Nothing will ever be the same. Every other experience after that, it'll be very hard to compare to the AT. It's like,
wow.
Yeah.
So do you see the potential next year then when you hike the CDT with Jessica? Do you think that's going to be a different type of hike for you? Because obviously you did the other hikes by yourself, obviously with a bunch of friends as well. But basically you were on your own there. Hiking with somebody like Jessica, are you looking forward to that part of it? And you think that may well become the favourite hike of your life?
Yeah, I am looking forward to it, and I got a little taste of what that could be like when I hiked with her for close to a month on the PCT. And
of course,
there's never a dull moment. We had a lot of fun, and we got along really well. And that's just a small portion of the PCT. So 2,800 miles on the CDT or 3,100 miles is a much longer time.
Yeah.
But I don't see it. I see it being incredible, honestly.
I'm sure it will be.
This year when I was on the CDT, I actually had the closest experience, to my original AT experience that I could have had.
Interesting.
I met some really incredible people. Yeah, just the whole. I don't know. The CDT is different. It felt different to the AT and the PCT, but the people I met and the relationships I developed out there were very close to what I had on the AT, and I don't know. I would guess I was very close. The CDT was very close to becoming my favorite trail and favorite trail experience over the AT this year. So I could see that easily happening.
You got stopped, didn't you, in Colorado?
Yes, yes. I was a couple hundred miles into Colorado in about the second and third week of September, and we just got a bunch of snow. It just shut down all the passes because most of the trail in Colorado is 10 to 12,000 feet
Wow.
in elevation, and the weather's just rolling in. And the snowpack in the spring is different from fresh snow, in the fall. And you just post hole through it, and it just takes forever to get the miles done, and you end up getting stuck on these exposed ridges, and nobody wants to try and get through that. And everybody that I knew that was in Colorado during that time either ended up road walking or just skipping down to New Mexico. And I still had 550 miles of Colorado to go.
Jeez.
And it wasn't going to sit well with me, if I road walked it or skipped it.
How are you with altitude? Can you cope with that okay? And you obviously discovered that in the PCT you could cope with it. Did you find it at all debilitating?
On the PCT, it took me about 5 days to adapt to it. Where I had to sit down all the time. I was out of breath, and I ended up taking little naps and stuff like that while I was up at elevation. And eventually I adapted to it. And I thought the same thing was going to happen to me out here on the CDT. But once I got up to 13,000 feet, I literally had one migraine. I got one migraine the first time I went up to that elevation, and I took a nap for about an hour. And I never had any other issues from there on out. I was still pushing 20, 25, sometimes 30-mile days over those elevations.
It must have been awesome. Now, I know you were in another relationship when you were hiking the AT and the PCT. And how supportive was your then girlfriend of your plans? Because this is not an easy thing for anybody to do, is it? To leave your spouse or your girlfriend or boyfriend or whatever you've got, to leave them behind for 6 months. How did she approach it? And was she supportive when you wanted to do that?
Yeah, it's very difficult, but when I was out there, she was supportive. If I needed anything, if I asked for anything, she was there, always offering. But as far as me leaving, she hated the idea of me leaving, and it was more like she tolerated that I was out there, and she kind of accepted it, and would help me when I was out there. But there was always just that. There was a little bit of guilt trip that was always thrown in. If I was taking a 0 day, it was you're dragging your heels, you don't want to finish and come back home and see me. Or if I did a short day, hurry up. Just she put that little bit of pressure on me that kind of made it a little more stressful.
It does show, though, doesn't it? You telling that story, it does show how lucky those of us who have someone who is 100% behind us, doesn't give you that extra aggravation, I guess it is, how important that support is. And one of the themes of nearly every person I've spoken to who's done a successful through hike, they had support from home and they didn't find it was impeded or even given in any way other than 100%. And that 100% support from home is massively important, isn't it?
Yeah, it's hugely important. Yeah. It's to have someone that's 100% behind you, that's not, giving you grief about your pace or your 0 days like that. That would be amazing, because I would find myself sometimes, when I got into town, when everyone was going to go out and, maybe have some drinks and have a good time together, I'd be like, I'm just going to stay, at the room or at the campsite, and keep her mind at ease so that, I don't catch any more grief than I'm already catching for being in town and not hiking.
So while you were on those hikes, did those 2 hikes change your attitude towards your girlfriend, or was it a more fundamental change towards life in general? Did they have an impact upon your overall outlook on life, or was it just towards your girlfriend?
It was definitely more of an overall impact on life in general. I just, all of a sudden, the things that I wanted out of life just completely changed. It went from kind of the conventional American dream to more of an unconventional life of freedom, and she was more concerned with putting down roots, house, fence, cars, debt, and all that stuff. And I was more focused on pulling roots up and being able to leave on a whim and do anything that I wanted. And so that ultimately, I think, is what what kind of drove the stake between us.
You got the perfect woman to do that with right now, haven't you? So you must totally understand you must totally understand each other's reasons for doing stuff, which must be a really nice thing, I must say. There aren't many people I think have that same simpatico thing, I guess.
It's kind of a double whammy in this case, because not only are we interested in the same things, but we're both trying to create the same life, making a living from the adventures that we do. So we can also bounce ideas off of each other, and we really help to bring out the best in each other in both of those arenas. So it's definitely a double whammy of positivity, so to speak.
That's cool. Now, I know you've already referred to it slightly. We're going to talk about your hike, the hike itself now. And to have taken about the same number of days as me, you must have taken tons of zeros, because I'm really slow, man. So were the zeros a method of recovery, or were they just a means of extending your time on the trail? And in light of what you just said about your girlfriend, I don't know what to say about that. So how do you feel about that? What were the zeros for?
On my AT hike, I took between 40 and 50 zeros, I think, out of a 195-day hike. Yeah. And if you would have asked us at the time, we would have justified every single one of those zeros as recovery time, quote unquote. We need to take this day and rest, when in all actuality, we were just enjoying the hell out of ourselves. And I mean, I took a lot of on-trail zeros as well. It wasn't always about just being in town. It was.
I was going to ask you that because you mentioned you became the mayor of Lancing River. What was it, Lancing Street, or what? Lancing River, something like that.
Lance Creek.
Lance Creek, yeah. And you were in the woods doing that, having a zero in the woods. Was that a thing you did quite regularly then, being in the woods having a zero?
A lot more. I have not. Let me see. I didn't take any on-trail zeros on the Pacific Crest Trail, and I didn't take any on the CDT. But I probably took somewhere around half a dozen on-trail zeros on the AT.
Interesting.
Just find a spot that I really liked, and I wouldn't want to leave, so I'd take a zero and enjoy it.
Oh, nice.
And,
you did take one of Max Patch, did you? Because that's a great place.
No, nothing. Almost. I'd spent probably about 3 or 4 hours up on top of that that mountain.
Beautiful, absolutely beautiful.
I took one. Oh yeah. Yeah. But one of my favorite on-trail zeros was probably Dismal Falls in Virginia.
I went for swimming that as well. It's a little off the trail.
Oh, gosh.
A little blue blaze off the trail, isn't it?
Yeah, it's about 0.3 of a mile off the trail, 20 miles north of the town of Bland.
Yeah, remember it well.
There's crawfish and trout and
nice,
all that stuff. So I was having a crawfish boil, and it was wonderful.
Now, one thing you became quite famous for on the trail was your Lion King moments with Katana, your dog. Tell us about Katana, who is a strange kind of dog, isn't she? And she referred to her when we were talking about doing this interview. She referred to her as being aloof, which is not a thing you would normally call a dog. So tell us about Katana.
Yeah, Katana is my little fur daughter, and she's a Shiba Inu, which is a Japanese breed of hunting dog. And they say they're the closest thing you can get to a cat without actually having a cat. So she has a lot of cat-like qualities as far as the attention she gives you and the love she shows you. I mean, she's loyal to a fault, but she's kind of like 50%, 50-50 on listening or whatever. She kind of just does what she wants to do.
Cool.
But it was definitely a hell of an experience trying to get that dog from point A to point B.
And she wasn't with you the whole trail, was she? I think she joined you after the Smokies. So,
yeah.
So tell us about those Lion King moments, because they were quite dramatic in their own way, weren't they? You made a big deal of it. I'm going to put one of those pictures on the show notes as well. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, so it was just a little after Max Patch, before the town of Hot Springs. So this is between Hot Springs and the Smoky Mountains. So pretty soon after I got her. And I just saw this little tiny rocky outcropping somewhere where I was taking a break, and I just held her out like Simba in The Lion King, and one of the guys I was hiking with snapped a picture of it. And from there, it just became kind of a tradition. Anytime I was at an overlook or in front of a waterfall or just anything that I could stand on top of and hold a little dog out on top of, just became a Lion King moment. And people just kind of ate it up online, and yeah, it was just funny. And,
isn't it funny how those things can be sort of viral, isn't it? That was such a genuine, funny moment, and then you could repeat it from time to time, and it was always it was even part of your Katahdin picture, wasn't it?
Yeah, I did one on top of Katana, and the Lion King pictures were kind of a point of controversy. You had a lot of bleeding hearts that would message me and be like, "You're going to drop that dog," or
get over themselves. Get over themselves.
Yeah, I mean,
oh really?
I'm a 230-pound guy holding my 20-pound dog, and she doesn't squirm when I pick her up. When I pick her up, she goes rigid as a board, and I never hold her out over the edges. But it kind of looks like it in the pictures.
Doesn't it make you wonder what sort of life some of these people lead? I mean, really, they just have to write crap about something, don't they? Anyway, so now the social part of the trail, and you probably answered this already. The fact that you took 50 zeros, you kind of got into the social part, I presume. Was that important from the beginning, or did it just kind of evolve while you're out there on the trail?
Definitely evolved. When I first went out there to do the trail, my game plan was go as fast as I can, just get it done and be able to say you did it. And when I got out there, I realized that was just the totally wrong reasons to do the trail. I made some friends that ended up becoming friends for life. I still talk to them regularly, and I go up to visit them. And the whole social aspect of the trail was something I was not expecting at all, but ended up being one of my favorite things about the journey. Overall.
It's important. You meet someone in the shelter, and funny enough, I think the trail names are one of the important factors for this. You meet somebody and you introduce each other as by your trail name, and people will often ask you, "Well, how'd you get that trail name?" And there's your conversation. You're up and running straight away, aren't you?
Yeah, it's a good icebreaker.
Exactly.
It's excellent. It's funny because the trail names also get confusing, because I know there's people that I hiked around for months, and then they'll add you on social media or something, and it's under their real name, and it's a person who's their head shaved and they don't have a beard anymore, and they're just some random person, and then finally they message you and you're like, "Who is this person?" They're like, "Oh, hey, it's so and so," and you're like, "Oh my God, like I knew you I hiked around you for hundreds of miles."
We all reinvent ourselves.
Really you don't learn too many real names.
No, you do we all sort of reinvent ourselves in many ways when we go on that trail, and you can become whatever you want to become, can't you? Really, I should think. Well, the real you is bound to get out there. Now, I know this. I ask this a lot of everybody who's actually done this, but how important was summiting at Katahdin and to you, and how did you feel when it was over?
I can't imagine a different finish to the Appalachian Trail than Katahdin. That is just of every mountain I've ever climbed to the top to, nothing is ever compared to Katahdin in my own personal opinion. Yeah. And it's funny because, up until I'd say like almost the entire trail, I would talk to people and I'd be like, "Man, I can't even imagine doing this again. Like, this has been so difficult, so painful." And I don't know why anyone would put themselves through this, more than once, which was something we would talk about with Baltimore Jack, because he did the trail 9 times.
Yes.
Like, what the hell is wrong with him? And I would say that I maintained that frame of mind, all the way at Katahdin. And after I touched that sign and I was on my way down, I remember turning to my friend Disa, and I was like, "Dude, I would do this all over again in a heartbeat. I would start this again tomorrow if someone gave me the chance." And that's how it's been. I think every through hike, you get kind of eager to finish, and then once you do finish, sometimes it can take a couple weeks, but for me, usually it's almost right away. I just want to do it again.
Awesome. That is awesome.
Incredible.
And I kind of guess I think I know the answer to this question, but if you'd known how this was going to change your life, and bear in mind you were in a relationship with somebody else at the time, how eager would you have been to take that first step on Springer? Or were you at that point in your life where you were ready to embrace a change anyway? Because they say a lot of people come to the trail with needing to do something or make some changes in their life. I can't think of one I particularly needed to do, but in your case, were you ready to make a change anyway, and that this was just the catalyst for it?
Definitely. At the time that I left to go do the trail, that was a perfect time to do it. I needed the change. I was in a rut. I was depressed. I needed adventure. I needed something different. I just needed something to just shake up my life. And now, having done it and knowing how it affected me and the impact it's had on my life, I would say that I wish I'd have done it when I was 16. I wish I'd have just quit school and left home and ran away and done the AT at the age of 16. Sooner rather than later.
How do you think I feel? I was 61 when I did it.
I know. Well, better late than never.
Absolutely. So. You're absolutely right. Now, I know when you got back, you wrote a book. In fact, I believe yours was the first book I saw from the class of 2014, Lost on the Appalachian Trail. Had you always intended to write about your journey, or from the beginning, or once you got on your journey, you thought there was something out there you could put into a book?
I'd never planned to write a book, and I kept a very detailed daily journal and a blog while I was out there. And the whole reason for that was, I wanted, family and friends knew that I was going out there, and I wasn't sure if the money situation was going to work out. I knew that was a big factor in why people didn't finish the trail. Yeah. And so, someone had told me, rather than, asking for donations from friends or family, why don't you provide content, so they feel like they're getting something, share the journey with them, and then they can donate to you if they want, and I had a GoFundMe page. And
that was forward thinking in 2014. Don't you think that was quite forward thinking in 2014? Yeah. Man, good for you.
Yeah. So that was the motivation to do the blogs and the journals out there, and was provide content for my friends and family back home so that they would, keep helping me along. And when I finished the trail, I was like, I have hundreds of pages of, every single day written down from this hike. I might as well stream it into a book.
Sure.
And so I had a perfect catalyst for that to happen. I fractured my ankle while I was on the AT in the Grayson Highlands. And when I got home after the trail, I had to have reconstructive surgery on my ankle. So I was down for the count for, 2-3 months.
Oh, wow.
Laid up in the bed. So it was the perfect time to just sit down and write. And that's when I got the ball rolling on all of that in November, December of 2014, and then finished it in July, I believe, was when I published the first copy. And
how many words did you write at the beginning?
Are you talking about for the whole book? How many words?
Yeah, for the whole book, yeah.
God, I'm not sure. It was somewhere around 400 something pages at first, and I think it might have been 190,000 words, maybe. I can't quite remember.
It's a lot. That's a lot, isn't it? I mean, I could have written 200. I wrote 150,000 in the end. I split it into 2 books, but I think I could have written 250,000 words. It was just, there's so many things you can say about this trail.
Yeah, it's one of those things where you have to kill your darlings. There's so much.
Stephen King
put in there.
Isn't that Stephen King who says that?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you have to kill your darlings. And I try to take that to heart when I'm writing now, because there's so much I can write that people reading it aren't really going to get anything from it. It means something to me, but I'm the only person it means something to. So I kind of have to keep myself in check and strike some of the things that I know aren't going to translate onto paper, that people aren't going to. It's not going to contribute to the overall story.
I actually found writing about the AT a bit like hiking the AT. I had some good days, I had some bad days, And when I had bad days when I was writing, you just stare at a blank screen. It was just a nightmare, I found.
Yeah.
So now I know your second book.
Sometimes it just comes to you.
Yeah, you did your second book, Hear the Challenge, Hike the Appalachian Trail. That's more about preparation and inspiration. What motivated that book?
I started that one. I wrote that one actually before I even left for the PCT. I wrote it in about the time of a month, and it was because I was getting so many people reaching out to me from the first book, and they had a lot of questions as far as gear and logistics and planning a hike, all these questions. And I just found myself sitting down just writing out the same stuff over and over and over again. And so finally I was just like, you know what, there's such a demand for this information, even though there's already, AT prep books and how-to books out there. I was like, I'm just going to write my own, from my own perspective with my own advice. So I sat down and I asked myself, what are all the things that I was wondering before I went and hiked the AT? And so I came up with all that, and then I wrote a book answering them all, and then some. And it was just kind of a pet project, and I just put it out there.
Cool, very cool. Now, as we mentioned, you're going on CDT with Dixie next year. Do you expect it to be hiking with somebody you care for, you love, for the first time? Is that going to be more difficult for you as a hiker? You can be, because frankly, I found it tough enough to look after myself on a hike. So God knows what it would be like with hiking with somebody else. Although, of course, she's incredibly experienced as well. You can be both worrying about each other the whole time. And how do you think that's going to work out for you?
I don't think it'll be too bad. We're pretty competitive people, so we tend to motivate each other a lot.
Yeah, looking forward to the 24-hour challenge, by the way. Really looking forward to that one between the two of you.
Yeah, which I heard her on her interview when she was in here, and she was talking about how she blew my old 24-hour challenge out of the water on the PCT with a 62-mile day. Well, what she didn't tell you was this year on the CDT, I went ahead and just tied her PCT record and hiked 62 miles.
You did it with 4 hours
this year.
Didn't you do it with 4 hours to spare? To be fair to her, she did say that on the YouTube video, didn't she?
Okay.
She fessed up. She fessed up, yeah.
I stopped so that we could set our own record together on the CDT this year. That way we're not just, going tit for tat until
that was so cool. I must admit, that was such a cool thing to do. Well, I'm so pleased we at last managed to speak with each other. I actually mentioned you as a potential person I'll be speaking to at the very pilot episode of this podcast. So I'm glad it's taken us 60-odd episodes to get to, and it's been worth every moment as far as I'm concerned. And I really appreciate you giving us the time, Carl. And I really enjoy following your journey. And I'm sure the two of you are going to have a great time next year. And I hope we can interview both of you together on the CDT, which would be really cool.
I hope so too. And it was a real pleasure. Thank you for reaching out, Steve.
Take it easy. All the best.
You too.
Bye. What a nice bloke. He's very laid back and pretty open about himself and his previous relationship. It was great to get his contextual comments on the 3 trails. That's going to be helpful for some of you embarking on the Triple Crown. Which one first? Mind you, just like Dixie, the AT will always be the one for Kyle. I know this speaks badly of my knowledge of the trail, but I'd never even considered the possibility of a 0 day on the trail itself. But the way Kyle talks about it makes it really appealing, doesn't it? An aloof dog. Who would have thought there was such a thing? I tell you, if you haven't seen them, his Lion King pictures with Katana are flipping priceless. I think I've got one in the show notes. Now, talking about the various trails, I wanted to read an email I got this week from a listener. It was from Dale Wiley, and as I seem to have lost my touch as a cyberstalker, I don't even know if Dale is a bloke or a woman. Mind you, his email address starts with a few letters, then Coyote, so I'm guessing he's a fella. Anyway, Dale says, I'm several years out from my 80 through hike, he put in brackets, waiting to retire, and have started acquiring gear. Listening to your podcast has been a big help in my preparations. Great. I've started to identify other trails that are 50 to 200 miles or so long for shakedown hikes, and just to get out on the trails. I was amazed at how many trails there were that I had never heard of throughout the country. The Superior Hiking Trail, the Uchida Trail, the Ozarks Hiking Trail, the Foothills, to name a few. These are places I plan on spending time the next few years, as I do not want to step foot on the AT until I attempt my through hike. I understand that. Any chance that you can have a segment where people talk about other trails in the country that people could use as training grounds for the AT, or just to enjoy backpacking them if they are not able to travel to the AT? Thanks for the work you do with the podcast and for all the valuable information provided on it. Now that is a great idea. Thanks for that, Dale. So, I'm putting the call out. Why don't we have a little segment, perhaps once Lynn has exhausted all the ways in which she can scare the living daylights out of you, in which a person comes on each week and talks about one of the lesser-known trails. This will be a great way, as Dale says, to prepare for the AT or any other long-distance hike. You know my email, so if you'd be happy to talk about one specific, smaller trail, why not drop me a line? If you're an expert on more than one, let me know that too. I hope enough people want to share because I think it'll be great for our community. So, with that in mind, let's hear from Lynn once more with DocSpot. Okay, we're back with Lynn. Hi, Lynn. How are you?
I'm good. It's good to be back.
And lovely to have you back as well. And we are talking today about something which probably won't affect any of you who hike the Appalachian Trail, if that is the only trail you hike. However, as those of you who've listened to the show regularly know, altitude sickness is something that's very dear to my heart, twice in the last 2 years, in fact. And so we're going to talk about altitude sickness today. And there are different degrees of it. And Lynn, I know you classify it based upon different heights. So let's take that away and talk about the heights that you're talking about.
Sure. So the basic height that you start to worry about is above 6,000 feet, but they consider high altitude anywhere from 8 to 12,000 feet, and then very high altitude from 12 to 18,000 feet, and then extremely high above 18,000 feet. Extremely high is mountains like Denali, Kilimanjaro. The middle ground, the very high, 12 to 18,000 feet, are the mountains like Mount Whitney or Everest Base Camp. And then the 8 to 12,000 feet, Taos, New Mexico, is at 9,300 feet. So that's in the high elevation.
Right.
So it gives you an idea of what we're talking about geographically when we say the amount of feet that we're talking about.
There's effectively nothing higher than extremely high.
Basically,
so,
yes.
Yeah,
yes.
I mean, Everest is 29,000 feet, and I'd imagine the physical impact upon your body at 29,000 feet must be huge, mustn't it?
Yeah, and that's beyond the scope of what we're going to talk about. If you want to talk about altitude sickness on Everest, you gotta go look elsewhere.
Okay, so what are the factors we're looking at when we look at that hiking at high altitude? Is there a certain type that gets affected by high altitude?
Actually, no. There's no body habitus. It's not predisposed for men or for women. There's no genetic or I should say ethnic background that causes people to have a higher tolerance to altitude. If you get it, you're going to get it. And if you do get it, you probably have your own personal genetic predisposition to becoming more prone to altitude sickness. You will probably get it again more easily if you don't prepare for it the next time.
But there's absolutely no certain type. Literally anybody could get it, couldn't they?
Literally anybody can get it, yes.
That's tough. So what actually causes it then?
So the air is quote-unquote thinner at higher altitude. That does not mean that you have fewer oxygen molecules. That's often an urban myth. It actually just means that the concentration of oxygen is lower than it is at sea level. I often use a picture of marbles in a jar and the same number of marbles in a bathtub. So the marbles are your oxygen molecules. And if they're in a jar, they're fairly close together. And if you can stick your hand in the jar and you can grab a bunch of marbles in one hand. If you put those same number of marbles in a bathtub, they're going to be rolling all over the place. You still have the same number of marbles. But when you stick your hand in that bathtub, you're going to come up with much fewer marbles. So when you take a deep breath at sea level, you're going to have a higher number of oxygen molecules in that one breath as opposed to at higher levels.
Would that have any, I mean, I'm just guessing. I noticed that when you cook certain foods at higher elevations, they say cook for longer. And I wonder whether that's something to do with the amount of oxygen that's in the water.
It's actually not the amount of oxygen in the water. It's the amount of pressure that is in the air. The air has less pressure as you're going higher. So the water boils actually at a lower temperature. So the water boils more easily. So if you have to boil something, you have to boil it for a longer period of time to actually cook it.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
So how do you actually acclimatise to higher altitude? Because as you know, I went there and I slept at about 9,200 feet for about 5 or 6 days. And yet once I got above a certain level, I was just toast. I was absolutely hopeless. So is the elevation to which you go important, or is the movement up and down along elevations important?
It's actually a little bit of both, and I have to say you did the right thing. You slept at a certain level for 5 days. You tried to acclimatize. Honestly, I'm not sure why you had trouble going up higher, because you did everything right. And the way to acclimatize is to ascend gradually, ascend no more than 1,600 feet per day. Right. There's also the adage, climb high, sleep low. So if you're going to ascend...
I don't think I did that. Yeah, I don't think I really did that. And somebody has said that to me, that going to 9,200 feet where I was a pretty good thing to do, but I should have gone down, say, 1,000 feet or 500 feet to sleep just a little bit lower. And I think that could have been my mistake. I won't be trying it again, I can tell you, though.
Yeah, so it's very important to sleep where you don't have any symptoms. So that's why they say climb high, sleep low. So you climb up, let's say 1,600 feet higher than where you would sleep.
Yeah.
Then you go back down and you sleep. Then you climb up maybe another 3,000 feet, and then you go back down another 1,600 feet. So you're actually making progress, but you're kind of leapfrogging back and forth, and you're sleeping lower than you've been up during the day.
Well, the irony is that in the week I was up there, I didn't have any symptoms at all. In fact, one day I hiked to 10,200 feet on about the fourth day, when I'd been sleeping at 9,200 feet, and I felt fine. I felt fine when I came down. It was only when I actually started hiking that really got to me. So what are the symptoms then?
Yeah, okay, so the symptoms are dizziness, headache, fatigue, shortness of breath, nausea or lack of appetite. And also you have some disturbed sleep. You have a kind of rapid breathing during sleep, or an undulating breathing where you breathe heavy for a little while, then you breathe very lightly for a while. And you generally just don't feel well.
I had most of those, by the way, when I got started, I must admit. Yeah, once I already got the hike going, I thought it was just exhaustion from hiking uphill, but could be in the beginning of the John Muir Trail, you do hike uphill for literally, I think it's 8 or 10 or maybe even 12 miles uphill all the way. It's just a nightmare, I tell you. Yeah, it was tough.
And you don't know if it's altitude sickness or if it's fatigue or if it's dehydration, or if you're doing this in the winter, is it hypothermia? Or if you're doing it in the summer, is it hyperthermia? So all of these symptoms are kind of all very similar, and you have to kind of treat them all at the same time and see which treatment helps your symptoms.
Okay. When does it normally start? When do the problems normally start?
Generally, it starts about 12 to 24 hours after you arrive at altitude, and usually subsides within about 2 to 4 days as your body acclimatizes.
Right.
One thing that's good to know is that it's okay to have these symptoms if they're mild, and if you can continue the activity without getting worse, that's okay too. You can continue to hike. If you're a little nauseous or a little dizzy, that's fine. It's when you start to get more severely symptomatic, or if you start to develop something called ataxia, and that's your motor coordination is off. You start to wobble back and forth, almost looks like you're drunk. If you start to vomit.
I think I had that because somebody found me. I was sitting on a log and my tongue was hanging out. I just didn't know where I was.
Oh my goodness!
So, I wonder if it was that. So they told me to come down, and I did.
Yeah, and you can't think straight. Those types of things. That's where you really need to descend, because that is really the only treatment for altitude sickness, is to descend to a level where your symptoms go away, and they do go away very rapidly.
Right. And so, what about severe? What is considered severe?
Severe symptoms are when it's a worsening of the moderate symptoms. Now you're short of breath at rest. You're unable to walk at all. Your lungs could start to develop fluid buildup, and that's called high-altitude pulmonary edema.
Yeah.
And that happens because the lack of oxygen...
No, that sounds good. No, that sounds good at all, does it?
No, not at all. Could also actually happen in the brain. You could get brain edema, high-altitude cerebral edema. Again, this is very dangerous, and that's why you need to descend before any of this happens.
So how do you treat this thing then? You talked about just going down low, and that helps when it's not too bad. What about with other things? How do you treat it in general?
So again, descent is the best thing for treatment. Acclimatization is important to try to help prevent it.
Yeah.
And that you can do it one of two ways. You could do it like the way that you did. You stay at elevation for several days till your body adapts.
Yeah.
Or oftentimes people will go, on trips and they just don't have the time to acclimatize. So you can take a medication called acetazolamide. The brand name is called Diamox.
Yeah, I took some of that. Yeah.
It's a medication that will help you manage your symptoms while you acclimatize. It's not a cure, but it will help you breathe faster, which is important to get more oxygen molecules in. It'll help you breathe a little deeper. It will also help your breathing rate while you're sleeping. When people sleep, their breathing rate slows down. And when you're sleeping at altitude, that's not something that you want to do because, again, you want to keep the oxygen molecules coming in as fast and as hard as possible. So this medication helps to increase your breathing rate while you're even sleeping.
What I didn't mention to you before was just before I went away, or probably a couple of months before I went away, I was diagnosed with sleep apnea anyway, so I suspect my breathing is less than optimum as it is. So I would think with less oxygen molecules coming in, my sleep apnea probably gave me a further problem in terms of sleeping as well, didn't it?
Yeah, it's very possible that could have exacerbated it, yes.
Right,
yeah.
Right, okay. So acetazolamide, and basically that's really only when you're getting ready for it. What happens once you've got it? You come down if it's moderate or severe. How do you treat it? Is it just simply the coming down which will make you better eventually?
Yes, it is. Sometimes if you're really in trouble and you need to be evacuated, then oftentimes the search and rescue people will give you supplemental oxygen. They even have this really fabulous device called a Gamow bag. It's actually spelled GAMOW, and it's a full-length body sack that increases air pressure. So they put you in this sack and they pump it up. It's like a little pressure chamber.
Oh my gosh.
It can increase the amount of oxygen that gets into your system very, very quickly. I would recommend you YouTube it because it's a very cool device. Really not something that you're going to take, on your own little backpacking trip.
Oh dear.
Yeah.
Well, look, this isn't something that many of us are going to cope with if we're just hiking the AT. But some of these higher things, I can just say from personal experience, Lynn, that it was the most devastating feeling to have. And I was so shocked when I got it because I thought I'd done everything right, but apparently I didn't. So if you're ever going to hike at elevation, think about these things that Lynn said, and trying to acclimatise must be the best way, I presume.
If you can do it, if you have the time, that's the best. Second best would be the acetazolamide.
Yeah.
And just climb high, sleep low.
Okay, climb high, sleep low. Okay, well, that's lovely. Well, thank you so much for that, Lynn. And I hope nobody ever has to worry too much about it once again. But yeah, thanks very much indeed. And we'll talk again next week.
Great. It's been a pleasure.
Cheers then. Bye.
Bye-bye.
I thought that was a great analogy about marbles in a jar and in a bath. So now you know what losing your marbles is all about. Also, I'd like to apologise for rambling on with that nonsense about boiling water. Sometimes my mind makes connections that I talk about without knowing the first thing about it. Moving swiftly on, next week we've got yet another treat. No, it's not an interview with Carl's dog Katana. Instead, we've got a young man who has hiked virtually everywhere in the world. In fact, he's currently getting maps together for a hike in the Atlas Mountains in Morocco next year. Now, you may be thinking, big deal, until you learn that this is Jim Kern, who founded the Florida Trail Organization, the American Hiking Society, Big City Mountaineers, and the Hikers Grand Slam. He's also, by the way, a very sprightly 83 years young. He was a delight to speak with, and I know that you're going to love hearing about his diverse adventures and interests. Also, while I remember, don't forget to join me and Bruce Matson first thing on Monday mornings as we talk about his preparations and eventually his attempt on a through hike of the Appalachian Trail. That's Returning to Katahdin, an Appalachian Trail Dream, available on iTunes and wherever you listen to your podcasts. The second part of Chapter 2 of Walking with Spring finds Earl Schaefer spending a convivial evening up the fire tower on the top of Wesser Bald. Once again, you'll have to forgive one of my speaking accents. He's also reached the gateway to the Smoky Mountains, and, like hikers to this day, he is excitedly anticipating this. As he refers to it, this Mecca of mountain fanatics, the land of the soulful song. I'll see you next week. I've never had a serious injury in a lifetime of hiking, including many work trips, and firmly believe this mental preparation is the main reason. At Wire Gap was a picnic table and trail shelter, a handy place to stop and cook. From there, the trail ascended a winding tote road, sometimes bordering precipices, to the summit of Wire Bald, elevation 5,500 feet. On top is a massive stone memorial to a man who served as supervisor of Nantahala National Forest for more than 25 years. The view is similar to that from Blood Mountain or Standing Indian, panoramic and far-reaching. Rain of the previous night was blowing off, and billowy white clouds were casting shadows in shifting shapes on every side. The ridge northward is high and leads to Burnington Bald, where I decided to stop at the lean-to, where washing clothes was logical because of abundant water. Unfortunately, more rain came at night and the clothes didn't dry. But the weather cleared for a while and I swung the clothes around to dry as I hiked, surely a strange sight for anyone who might have been watching. At noontime, the rain had resumed and I was on another long upslope, this time to the fire tower on the summit of Wesserbald. While still 100 yards from the tower, I noticed a man on the catwalk waving and calling, "Come on up! Come on up!" Said I to myself, that guy must really be lonesome. He was a typically tall, lean mountaineer and was cooking his noonday meal. Very casually, he went about adding to skillet and kettle. Presently, he dished out pan bread, spoon gravy, bacon, beans and coffee and said, "Help me eat this. Too much for one." He said he liked the job of lookout fairly well, but was a family man and didn't like being alone so much. Just then, the phone rang. He listened a moment, then grinned across at me and said, "I got a visitor today. A lone trail hiker. He wants to take right off again, but I won't hardly let him." He explained afterward that his family called from Tellico Valley sometimes to break the monotony, but would not call again until he told them I had left. The weather was rainy, but when I talked about leaving he countered with, "Better stay the night," and kept up such a constant talking that leaving was difficult. We talked about hunting, politics, war experiences, he had also been in the Pacific, and numerous other topics. He told of a bear hunt the previous autumn with some of his cronies, chasing down a giant black bear with his pack of dogs. It was a running fight, with the dogs getting the worst of it while he was frantically trying to keep them from getting killed or crippled. One of his buddies finally caught up and shot the bear. It took 2 days to get the bear off the mountain, and the parts they packed out to a store where a scale was available weighed a total of 503 pounds. He said he knew where another big old bear hung out, and he would take me to the hunt if I came back in the fall. At supper time, my host gleefully declared it was now too late to leave, pointed to the extra bunk on hand in case a ranger stopped by, and reached for the cooking gear. He said this was one of the best towers in the district. It was about 15 feet square, equipped with a chunk stove, wood box, the 2 bunks, 2 chairs, telephone, 2-way radio and orientation table. With rain still falling, I wasn't hard to persuade. After supper, talking resumed. At 11 o'clock we agreed it was time to sleep. The silence lasted at least 5 minutes before he said, "You know, I often will lay awake at night and think about most everything under creation." At 12 we tried again with similar results, and again at 12:30 before we fell asleep. The light of a clear dawn awoke me. The storm had settled into the surrounding valleys, leaving the highest peaks jutting like islands from a sea of fog. Then the sun rose, lighting a golden path across that misty sea. Seldom, even in the South Seas, have I seen anything to compare. Later, the fog cleared, revealing a wild and beautiful panorama. South and west lay a jumbled expanse of ridges with deep valleys between. Eastward was the Tellico Valley, still full of fog. Below to the north lay the canyon of Wesser Creek, descending steeply to the deep abyss of Nantahala Gorge. Beyond, on the skyline, was the silhouetted crest of the entire Smoky Mountain Range, loftiest and most massive east of the Rockies. During breakfast the towerman grinned and said, "Well, we fought about 3 wars and 4 election campaigns and hunted nigh every critter in the woods last evening. I enjoyed every minute of it. Why don't you stay over a day or two? We've got lots more to talk about." When reminded that the end of the trail was far away and time was fleeting, he agreed. But while I was packing, he kept repeating, "I hate to see you go. I hate to see you go." Part way down the canyon was a small farm, the house of stone, nicely handled, and the small fields nearby neatly kept. A man was sitting on the porch gazing towards the Smokies. I told him I always had wanted a place like this, where no one could build higher up. He smiled and replied, "It does make you feel better." Farther down the creek was an old mill wheel, so ancient it was settling into the bank of the stream. The rest of the mill was already gone. At the juncture with the main road at Wesser was a small ramshackle store, crammed to the rafters with an amazing variety of groceries and other goods. I stopped to get food and to leave the pack while sidetracking to Bryson City for colour film, one thing the old gentleman didn't have in stock. He mentioned that another hiker had stopped the day before and he had never seen a hungrier man. This individual, though rather small, had devoured the contents of several large cans as well as large quantities of cookies and candy before leaving the store. A ride on a lumber truck got me to Bryson City. Besides colour film, I bought a small spoon and spatula which would work much better than my axe for turning pan bread. After all, you can go only so far for simplification. 2 short rides then got me back to Wesser, where the trail crossed the river on the highway bridge. However, marking was entirely lacking and I missed the turn off the road, continuing into the gorge until the mistake was obvious. The choice now was to backtrack or to bushwhack up the steep, high slope, which is what I chose and thereby jeopardised the entire expedition instead of saving time. The greenbriers were incredibly nasty and the slope almost perpendicular. I must have been a pathetic figure, streaming with sweat, bleeding from scratches, every muscle aching, crawling endlessly in a back-slipping, bush-clutching struggle before coming out on top. While recuperating, flat on my back, I vowed to avoid such foolishness in the future. The weather chilled that night as I bivouacked in a high gap, where the sound of running water somewhere below guaranteed water for breakfast. Night wind sounds much the same, but moves. Next day I side-trailed from Stokoa Gap to Chioa to mail home the tent, ridding myself of 7 useless pounds. Then the track resumed along the crest of Chioa Mountain, over a series of tops, before dropping abruptly to follow a creek for several miles, crisscrossing back and forth on corduroy roadway, which is made by placing logs or poles crosswise. By now the sun was low, but I kept on in hope of reaching a shelter. For once it worked. In the deep dusk I rounded a spur and spotted a lean-to in the next cove, then spotted a man as he stepped outside. He was the one who had started from Oglethorpe on Easter Sunday. His buddy had joined him at Wesser. They planned to hike until time for college in the fall, hoping to go all the way. The first one said that he had tried to start from Katana but was stopped by rangers. I was to hear details of this later in Maine. He left Millinocket in early March through foot-deep snow, wearing riding boots and carrying an enormous pack. Luckily, 2 game wardens on a snow sled, driven by an airplane motor, crossed his trail, followed and found him sitting in the snow about to fall asleep, permanently. They hustled him back to town and told him to come back in June. Instead, he caught a train for Georgia. He and his buddy were using mountain troop frame packs, same as I was, but had not stripped them down for efficiency. Their footgear was tennis shoes for dry weather, rubber high tops during rain, a combination guaranteed to ruin the toughest feet. While I was cutting wood, one of them said in an undertone, "Look at that! He's cutting more wood in 5 minutes than I did in an hour." At bedtime, he said he would set the alarm clock for an early start because they wanted to reach the Smokies the next day. Sure enough, the blare of that mechanised rooster, a full-sized Big Ben, shattered the sylvan silence at 5:30. At daybreak they departed, noticing I was awake and remarking that I probably would be overtaking them anyway, which I did about 9 o'clock. Just how eccentric they really were soon became evident. Both carried binoculars and cameras and stopped to inspect closely birds, animals, bugs, rocks, flowers, trees, whatever. Everything was discussed at length without any background knowledge. They kept no records and reached no conclusions. The mental picture I retain is of one holding a salamander by the tail while the other photographed it. Marking was extremely poor. When we came to a trail junction overlooking the village of Fontana Dam, we didn't know which way to go, so decided to ask in town. No one seemed to know, but our maps, such as they were, indicated a continuation on Yellow Creek Mountain to Topoko. Actually, the trail was being changed to cross Fontana Dam, but the marking had not been changed. So we continued on Yellow Creek Mountain. Fontana Dam is part of the Tennessee Valley Authority and one of the highest dams in the world. The workers lived in the village, which now had become a resort centre for vacationers and fishermen. All afternoon we plodded along the crest of Yellow Creek Mountain over a series of upthrust peaks made treacherous by steep and leafy slopes. Sometimes lizards skittered from underfoot, keeping us careful and thinking of snakes. My companions had been medical corpsmen in the Navy. One planned to be a research scientist and the other a naturalist, which explained their intense interest in flora and fauna. We discussed hiking gear and the light loads they were carrying, about 30 pounds each. I recalled seeing a toothbrush along the trail in Georgia. Says the guy. Thought I'd heave that into the bush. My toothbrush, by the way, was not thrown away, but it did lose its handle. Inevitably, a long-distance hiker must choose between travelling light and not travelling at all. Topoko is a small resort town at the juncture of the Chioa and Little Tennessee rivers. As we approached the end of the ridge overlooking the town, conditions became so bad that we lost the trail completely. We finally bushwhacked down that brushy mountainside, and no better word could be found to describe that sliding, crashing descent. The other two headed immediately in the direction of Topoko Lodge, a deluxe tourist haven, as if they couldn't wait to escape the forest, while I was loath to leave its solitude. I never saw them again. After shaving at the riverside, it was my policy to be as presentable as possible. I headed for the grocery, which someone told me was a mile away on a side road. The place was typical, little more than a shanty, but locked and deserted. A man at a nearby house said the proprietor was up the road for a piece, helping to roof her house. Eventually, he came and opened for business. The only thing he could find to put my stuff in, customers brought their own containers, was an old potato sack, so up the road I went with it over my shoulder. Had anyone suggested that Gunny Sack would go with me all the way to Maine, I surely would have called him crazy, but it did, proving useful in many ways, one of my best accoutrements. No mail was waiting at the post office, but the postmaster gave me a map of the Great Smoky Park, showing the trail route and shelter locations. For the next few days, I actually would know the names of places and what to expect. All my life I had wanted to see this mecca of mountain fanatics, the land of the soulful song. The ex-Navy men were nowhere in sight as I stowed my grub in the pack and moved along. Half a dozen young folks were standing at the bridge. They stared curiously, but said nothing. The trail turned upslope on a dirt road toward the park. The sun had already dropped behind the ridge. The past 2 weeks were vivid memory now as I trudged along. The trailway through the Nantahala had been extremely rugged and is in fact considered to be one of the most strenuous parts of the entire trail route. This was because of the up and down travel over a series of cross ridges. But the weather had improved greatly and I was hitting my stride. During those 2 weeks it somehow had been difficult to persuade myself to keep going. How easy it would have been to quit, but the mood was changing. Now I would have had to be dragged off the trail. I had come to the woods to walk with spring. Says I to myself, "Get going, Ridge Runner. Remember that song you wrote one time far off in the coral sea." A whisper comes in the dead of night when lonely stars are shining. The restlessness of a bird in flight from deep within me pining. From lonely seas to the mountains high I'll roam the whole world over, a vagabond of the wind and sky, for I was born a rover.